Today I'm going to be sharing some beginner's acrylic painting tips on painting realistic eyes and fur on animals. My first tip is that when you are a beginner artist, don't think that just because you're a beginner, you can use any reference photo. It doesn't really matter. It matters even more, I think, for beginners to learn to have a good, solid photo before you get started. This one came from Pixabay. So there are free, royalty-free sites. Don't just steal stuff off the internet. This one's actually a royalty-free site that we can use on our work. No, this sounds like a sponsored video. It's not. It's just a free place that I get photos from them and Unsplash. I'll put a link in the video description. But the point is, get a really good photo. And in this case, it's a full face. You may be thinking, wow, that is really overwhelming. That's a lot of detail. Now, this is my next tip for beginners. Don't start with trying to paint the entire animal, or even in this case, just the head. Break it down into smaller elements. We're just going to focus on the eye and the fur around the eye. Once you get comfortable with that, then let's move on to the full head. Once you get comfortable with that, let's move on to the full body. But let's break it down into smaller areas, smaller bite-sized chunks that aren't so overwhelming as you're getting started with painting. My next tip, as you can see here, that is not even close to the same color at all as the reference photo. The reference photo is a more muted tan color, where mine is it's burnt sienna. It's pretty red. Doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. We get so caught up on color being perfect. The color is not what is going to make or break your artwork. It's not the thing. It's the thing as beginners we think matters more than anything, but it's not the thing that is going to make your work look really realistic, really three-dimensional. That comes down to your values. What I mean by values are how light are your lights, how dark are your darks. The high contrast there and getting those values correct, that's what's going to start making your work look more three-dimensional, look more realistic. It doesn't matter if you have the exact same color. Close is generally good enough. Now, one major exception to that is going to be yellow. There are very, very few animals in nature that have yellow fur. So you're painting a yellow lab, you're painting somebody with blonde hair. Yellow's not usually the color I'm going to use in any of those unless there's a really unique glow from the sun. Normally we're going with more tan, more muted tones. So yellow tends to give you, that's one color where I say yellow or color doesn't matter that much. Avoid yellow in most cases when you're drawing animals are getting a natural human hair color. So I'm starting with these base layers. And look at how I'm leaving my brush strokes showing on that eye. I'm going to let those brush strokes work as additional detail without having to actually put the effort into adding additional detail. Yay for being lazy. I'm using a tack-on bristled brush, so it's a more rounded tip. And that gives me that nicer start and stop finish, or start point. If you're using a brush that has a flat edge, or we would just call it a flat, those tend to have really straight lines where you stop and start each brush stroke. Here with this, because I'm using a tack-on bristled brush for those, it's a softer, more rounded edge. It just looks nicer. Now, I'm not super picky about the brushes I use for my acrylics. Mostly, I'm either going to use a tack-on bristled or a synthetic hog-haired bristle brush in various rounds, some flats. There is a time where we like flats, but mostly filberts. Those are my favorites. The brush you see me using here is a Simply Simmons round brush. Now, your first layers are going to look terrible. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not an indication of what that end result is going to be. So my next tip for you with acrylic painting or any art really, layer until it looks good. Don't be discouraged if things don't look good in the beginning. You're just going to keep layering until they do. You don't hit a point where you can't do more layers. It's not like colored pencil where it won't take anymore. You can just keep layering until it looks good. Don't get frustrated. Don't throw it away. Just keep working on it until you figure out how to make it work. Now that paint is still wet as I'm adding the gray over it to get the highlights around the eye. Now this is why it's so important to have a decent reference photo so that you can see this sort of detail. Is it exact to my photo? No, this is a loose beginner type lesson. It doesn't need to be exact to still come out looking good. Now, really quick, if you're watching this thinking, oh my gosh, this is moving so fast, I wish it was in real time, I've got that for you. If you head over to Patreon for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my longer tutorials. I have over 300 available because the screen is lying to you right now when it says 200. I have over 300 available immediately when you sign up and a new one every single week in multiple mediums. If you want to check out my Patreon video library, the link to that is in the video description if you want to see if there are lessons that do appeal to you. I've also got several new tiers for you to check out. One has coloring pages. I've got stickers. There's all kinds of fun stuff. So head over and check that out. Now back to this guy, I'm adding layers of the raw sienna, or burnt sienna into the eye right over some of that green, and then I've got the pupil. I'm gonna let that dry. So that eye is not finished. It looks really scary right now. I'm gonna let it dry, and I'm gonna come through with a liner brush or a script liner, and I'm using unbleached titanium white here. I'm just going to start blocking in where the fur, the detail is around the eye. You can also use a rake brush, and we'll be using that later. I'll also have a video that shows you more in detail how to use a rake brush, but we'll be using a bit of that too to create the look of fur faster and a bit easier. But at this point, I'm just blocking that in mainly because the rest of the eye needs to dry before I start glazing the shadow over it. So here is my rake brush. And what a rake brush is, if you put your hand in front of you with your fingers close together, there's your typical tack bristled filbert. Well, maybe not tack but it's a filbert. It's rounded. And if you spread your fingers out now, that is your rake brush. So with one brush stroke, you can get a whole lot of little brush strokes. It can make things go a lot faster when you're creating fur. You can use it for grass as well. Now here's the thing, and this is where the rake brush goes terribly wrong for some artists. You don't want to just use the rake brush. So as you can see, I'm using the rake brush here. I still will want to come back in between some of these bits of fur and create some variation with the clumps and clusters of fur with the liner brush. So the rake brush is a great tool, but it's not the only one that you're going to use for creating fur. And technically you don't need it all. You can do just everything with a script liner or a round brush. Now I need to get variation, wow, that's not how you say that, variation in the fur. We're not here for grammar, but I need to get some variation in the fur or pronunciation apparently. Moving on, Lisa. Variation in the fur to make the fur look natural. Look how it clumps together, how it overlaps. If you don't get this clumping together, you just have random hairs all over. I don't care how many hairs you put. If you sit there with a liner brush and put every single individual strand of fur, it won't look right if you don't have the fur clumping and clustering together and overlapping right. So this is where you're going to need a lot of practice, and it's why it's so great to work on a smaller study like this versus trying to do the entire body while you're learning to draw fur. Do some little samples like this and really practice that first. And all I'm working with here is unbleached titanium white, so it's like a cream color. The reason that I'm not bothering to try to get the fur color in here is I can glaze over this and tint it another color if I need to. This makes it easier than trying to mix the perfect fur color. Now I've taken black along the top of the eye and then taken a clean brush and I just smudged it around. So this is the shadow that the upper eyelid is casting. So it makes him not look so creepy like he's staring at you. Cleaned up the edges with the black paint there. Got some highlights with the unbleached titanium white along the bottom of the eye. So we've got this nice transition where it's really dark along the top, and that's why I needed it to dry completely. I glazed over that, and what a glaze is, I've added a little bit of water to my paint, thinned it out so I could easily just, almost like tinting your windows. You can still see the color underneath it or what's behind it, but you darkened it, and that's what I did there with that glaze. Now that has to dry completely before I do the white highlights over the eye. Otherwise, that black will just smudge into it and make a gray mess. So while that dries, I'm going to come over here and start glazing the shadows in the fur. So I'm using some browns. I'm still using my rake brush, but this time I have so much water mixed in with it and so much paint, it's really working just like your normal filbert. That brush, and I've got a separate video showing you how to load it. I've actually got a couple videos explaining that. I will put a link in the video description, or a card will pop up if you want more information on how to get that brush to work for you if you've had any troubles with it. But see how you can still see the fur marks I made below it, but now I'm just tinting the color. That's why I didn't care if I had the perfect color as I was working. Let's simplify it. Do everything with the unbleached titanium white. You could do that for most shades of animal. So let's say it was a more brown animal. I can still use the unbleached titanium white and get all of my fur marks and then glaze brown on top. Or if I was painting a macaw, I've got a video where I did that. All the detail of the feathers was done in white over the blue, and then I glazed blue on top of that, so I had all that detail without trying to mix the detail of the feather color in the first place. So by glazing, you can make things a lot easier on yourself. And again, glazing, I'm just tinting the color of what's already there, but I'm using a very opaque color first. We've got the shine of the eye here. I'm using some transparent mixing white, so it's translucent. So I just get that glossy look, and then I'll do a little highlight. Oh, get some blue in there. I always like to use blue in my highlights, and then a little bit of a shine. He doesn't have a lot of shine on his eye. And then I've also got that brightest highlight at the very bottom of the pupil. That is where the light is escaping. Makes it look shinier too. Now I can come through with my liner brush and get those final details. So like I mentioned before, we're not just going to do all of the fur with a rake brush. We want to come back through and get some detailing and clean up edges with a liner brush so that we do have variation in there. It's not as uniform. The rake brush has a tendency to just make things a little bit too uniform. So that's why we want to break it up by using another brush in addition to that. Final details there, just adding some black over the edges around the eye, some more highlights. And this is such a great example. I know I mentioned this already, but look at how this is so red compared to the color, or really orangey, compared to the color of the original subject. It's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. Especially in the beginning, don't even worry about that right now. Worry about your values. Light's light enough, dark's dark enough. These are the things that are going to make the biggest difference in your work. It doesn't matter if you find the perfect tan, if you find, let's say you're painting a bird and it's the perfect blue. It doesn't matter, because if you do everything that perfect color, you made a cartoon. If you want it to look realistic, that is in your values. Your dark's dark enough, your light's light enough. And you're going to have layers you don't like, where you're like, oh, it looked better 2 layers ago. I'm making it worse. Stop, take a break, go on a walk, get yourself some tea, whatever you need. Take that break and then come back and layer on top of it. A bad layer does not mean you've ruined anything. It just means you're not finished yet. Every single painting I have ever done, I will have layers I hate. And you always have that doubt where you're thinking, oh, should I just start over? I can't pull this one off. I don't think I've ever done a painting where there wasn't a moment where that hit, where I'm like, oh, maybe I should just start over. Keep layering until it looks good. You need to teach yourself to start working through those stages. You're going to learn so much more by figuring out how to fix things you didn't like than just starting over. Otherwise, you're not really progressing. You're just getting to that same stage again and again and again, and you will always hit a stage where you don't like it. So if you don't learn to work through it and how to fix those stages, it's going to be really hard for you to progress. But my main point of this whole video, do some smaller studies. Like in this case, an eye and just the fur around it. I'm not worried about the full head and trying to get everything all perfect there. This is a great way to practice both fur and the detail in eyes. Before I leave you today, I thought I'd give you a quick update on Glitch, who is doing amazing. Glitch, if you're not aware, is one of my red-eye tree frogs. She's got a neurological disorder that developed from a bad reaction to a medication the vet had prescribed. So she has been in a smaller than usual tank for a frog her size, just because she had trouble keeping her balance and she fell a lot. Well, she has been improving over the months. This all started back in January. So we're almost a year in, and she is doing so much better. So she is getting a huge upgrade to her vivarium. Right now, the one she's in is pretty small, just it was keeping her safe, but we're ready to upgrade. So this is the new vivarium that is in progress. I've got everything silicone down, the branches. You can't see the depth here. I'll show you the top view so you can see better. She's going to have so many great places to sit now. Here, everything is from the top. By the way, those of you on MeWe, you guys have already seen this. If you're not following me on MeWe, join me over there. Link is in the video description. That is where I spend most of my time when I'm not on YouTube or in the studio painting. So here is the top view. You can see how all of these branches are sticking out. And this is where I had just started to spray or add the spray foam. That's the black globby stuff that you're seeing there. So here's the front view. It has to stay on its back until everything dries completely. But there are all of those branches. So the next step will be to let this dry tomorrow or tonight if it's dry all the way. I'll go through with an X-Acto knife and start carving those black foamy bits, and then go over, cover it all with silicone, cover that with cocoa fiber, and then that needs to set and just air out, because the silicone, it is very strong in odor. It makes all of our painting supplies seem fume free, but that, like oil paints, are nothing compared to the silicone. But we'll let that dry completely, and then I can start putting in all of these plants that I got for her. I got this black velvet alocasia at Aquashella from Houston Frogs was it? No, 2 weeks. God, I don't even know what time it is. A couple of weeks ago. And then I've got this other grouping of plants that I've been saving for a while, just collecting and sticking in this little bin. So those, I'm not sure what all I will end up using, but all of these are ready. I know for sure the bromeliads, but we've got quite a few plants in there to go. I really like those little tiny Tiny Dancers alocasia, the tiny little leaves in there. I had to order some new light bulbs for the tank, and so I went to BioDude's website and ordered, or the BioDude, I ordered a Monstera Addisonii. I got a Alocasia Poly, so those are smaller. I'm really excited about that one, and a Lightning Jewel Orchid, so those are also going to go in the tank. I don't know what all is going to make it into the tank, because I think I've got way more plants than the tank allows for, but Glitch is getting a new home within the next couple of weeks. This should be aired out and ready to go for her. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, YouTube probably still won't notify you when new content goes live. So also click on the bell notification icon because you're more likely to be notified. And just remember, I have new videos every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.